There's a line from this book that every single Italian uses. It's either in politics, in gossip, in arguments with their parents, and most of them have no idea it comes from a 300-page novel about a dying prince. For everything to stay the same, everything must change. That's the Leopard, Il Gattopardo of Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. And if you're Italian, you already know this story because honestly, chances are you read it in school when you were just a teenager having to read things that you were told to read. If you're not Italian, buckle up because we're about to unpack one of the most important novels in modern Italian literature and the controversial Netflix series it basically inspired. I am going to walk you through a bit of everything. The real history behind it, the man who wrote it, why this book is basically almost sacred text in Italy, how the series stacks up, and where it quietly or not so quietly, well, betrays the source material. Let's get to it. So before we even touch the Netflix show, you need to understand what Il Gattopardo actually means culturally in Italy. This isn't just a classic novel. It is the highest selling novel in Italian publishing history and the story of how it got there. The author is Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. He was born in 1896 in Palermo into the real Sicilian aristocracy. His own family carried the title of Prince of Lampedusa. He spent his life watching the exact world that he would later write about quietly disintegrate. Basically, inherited states crumbling, old titles losing their meaning, a Sicily left behind by the rest of Italy. He was famously erudita, so erudite. He was fluent in 5 languages, but by most accounts, he was also a very shy, private man who struggled with ordinary life. And he only found the will to write the novel once that aristocratic world had already collapsed around him completely. His book almost never made it to print. In 1957, Elio Vittorini rejected the manuscript on behalf of Einaudi, one of Italy's most important publishing houses out there. He said it was reactionary and very old-fashioned. Lampedusa died that same year that his novel got declined, never knowing that Feltrinelli would then pick up the book and publishing it in 1958, a year after his death. The book ended up winning the Strega Prize, Italy's top literary honor, that same year that was published. Other early critics were just as harsh, for different reasons. Leonardo Schiascia, one of Sicily's own writers, initially argued that the novel did a disservice to the real history of the Risorgimento, though then he later reversed himself completely and called it a masterpiece. None of that slowed the book down. Over 50 editions were printed in less than 2 years, and the paperback has been reprinted dozens of times since. There's something almost strange in all of this. His biographer, David Gilmour, called Lampedusa the last Leopard, and that title captures the loop at the heart of the whole story. It is an author who became in real life the very thing his most famous character essentially represents, the last of a species, writing itself into the memory right as it goes extinct. But here's the twist though. The book's signature line, "Everything must change so everything can stay the same," isn't even spoken by the main character of this book, Don Fabrizio himself. Lampedusa gives it to Tancredi, the nephew of the main character, the next generation, which is arguably an even darker joke here, since it means that the very cynicism the line describes is already being, passed down before the old prince has even died. That line is also why the book refuses to stay in the past. It's assigned in high school classrooms across the country, and it gave the Italian language one of its most used political phrases. Italians use it in politics, in business, in everyday cynicism about reform that never really reforms. Around the world we all have the same problems. You may ask, why does it hit so hard? And here's what I found out about it. The book isn't really about 1860. It's about Italy's relationship with change itself. The way power reshuffles, but rarely redistributes. The way new money buys its way into the old blood bloodlines, the way institutions survive by pretending to transform. Every generation of Italians seem to basically reread that theme into their own political moment that they're living in. Now, let's get into what's actually happening historically, because the emotional core of this story is a real shift. The fall of the Bourbon monarchy in southern Italy and the unification of the country is at the core of everything. For centuries, southern Italy and Sicilia were ruled by the Bourbon dynasty, the kingdom of the two Sicilies. It was conservative, insular, aristocracy heavy, and by the mid-1800s, it was rotting from the inside. Economically stagnant, politically rigid, deeply unequal, basically a kingdom running on inertia and good tailoring. Then somebody shows up, Giuseppe Garibaldi. In 1860, Garibaldi landed in Sicily with a volunteer army known as the Red Shirts. Barely 1,000 men. Not that big, right? 1,000 guys against an entire kingdom. And somehow, within months, they toppled Bourbon rule across the south. This campaign, which was called the Expedition of the Thousands, is one of the defining moments of the Risorgimento, the decades-long movement to unify Italy into one single nation. By 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was declared, and the old Bourbon world, the world our main character belongs to, was finished as a political force. The aristocracy itself lingered on a while longer, just increasingly relevant, like a party guest who hasn't really noticed everyone else already left. Well, that's the backdrop. Now, let's meet the family living through it. Our protagonist is Don Fabrizio Corbera, and his title is the Prince of Salina, Il Principe di Salina in Italian. That title isn't decorative flavor text. It is the whole point. He is the head of one of Sicily's old noble houses, a man of real intellectual depth, an amateur astronomer, actually someone who would honestly rather be studying the stars than doing the math on the state collapsing's finance. If you've ever avoided opening a bank statement by reorganizing basically your whole bookshelf instead, congratulations, you already understand Don Fabrizio. He is proud, physically imposing, and sharply self-aware. He knows better than his peers that his class is finished. The nobility calls itself leopards and lions. Proud predators they, huh? But Don Fabrizio sees what's coming. He's smart. The jackals and the hyenas are coming for him. The opportunistic new middle class. It is about to inherit everything in Sicily. And here what makes him genuinely tragic rather than just melancholic. He is not in denial. He is aware. He sees the ending clearly, crystal clear. He just cannot stop it. And you know what? Part of him doesn't even want to. His family relationships are where the emotional story lives. His nephew Tancredi represents adaptability. He is charming, ambitious, politically flexible enough to join Garibaldi's revolutionaries, even though he's aristocracy by blood. Our protagonist, Don Fabrizio, adores Tancredi, arguably more than his own son, because Tancredi understands the game. Survive change by embracing it, not resisting. He's a true politician. And honestly, I think that's the most quietly cynical relationship in the whole story. Don Fabrizio doesn't love Tancredi despite his opportunism. He loves him because of it. His daughter, Concetta, is on the opposite pole of this whole story. She is devoted, she is sensitive, and has long harbored feelings for her cousin, Tancredi. We gotta have a love story. But Don Fabrizio makes one of the most quietly devastating decisions, effectively steering Tancredi towards politically and financially advantageous marriage instead of his own daughters. He pushes his nephew to marry Angelica, the strikingly beautiful daughter of a socially climbing mayor. What gets me about this is that Don Fabrizio never deceives himself about it. He's not a villain who thinks he's doing the right thing. He just decides the math is worth it. And Concetta is the one who pays the difference, who pays the price. That trade-off, love sacrificed over strategic continuity, is the emotional spine of the whole story. His actual son, poor thing, don't get me started, barely registered next to Tancredi. Somewhere there is a young man standing in a room being quietly, professionally ignored by his own father. And this show doesn't even need to underline, and that's how brutal the detail is on its own. Now, let's get more into the series. Netflix adaptation dropped globally on March 2025 as a 6-episode limited series. It picks up the story right as Garibaldi's red shirts are closing in on Palermo. The Corbera family flees the capital for their countryside state, Don Affogata. And that displacement is what throws Don Fabrizio, Tancredi, Concetta, and the ambitious Sedara family, who is the mayor's family, into direct, prolonged contact for the very first time. From there, the show tracks the fallout of the marriage we already talked about. The political order outside crumbling in with the emotional order inside the house. In this series, Concetta eventually steps up to help her father protect the family assets from Sedara and Angelica's circling ambitions, working alongside her brother Francesco. And in the show's final movement, the new Italian king offers Don Fabrizio a symbolic seat in the Senate, a chance to formally join the new order of this new world. But he turns it down. He dies among the family instead. One of the last true Leopards of vanishing Sicily. And I would argue that refusal is the whole show compressed into one single gesture. Everyone around him spent the 6 episodes changing and shaping to survive. Tancredi switching sides, Sedara buying his way in, even Concetta learning to fight for the state of her family. The one man who saw it all coming first is the one who at the very end simply refuses to play the game. Regarding the production, well, there is a 3-director production here, which is unusual and worth flagging, honestly, here with you guys. 3 directors splitting a 6-episode seasons is exactly the kind of setup that can produce a tonally strange show. In other words, what I mean is too many cooks in the kitchen. Different visual instincts colliding mid-season. Yes, we have that a little bit. From what is on the screen, it holds together better than that the math would suggest. Though you can occasionally see the seams between episodes if you're really looking for them. Tom Shackland, known for The Serpent series and House of Cards, directs 4 of the 6 episodes and serves as the lead creative voice here, while Giuseppe Capotondi and Laura Lucchetti each direct 1 episode. The whole thing was created and written by Richard Warlow. And here are some context worth having. This is the 2nd major screen adaptation of this novel, following Luchino Visconti's 1963 film, a Palme d'Or winner starring Burt Lancaster and Alain Delon, that is widely considered one of the greatest films in Italian cinema. That is the shadow that Netflix version is stepping into, and it's a long one to catch up. Netflix production itself was, from an Italian perspective, quite big. Reportedly around a 40 million budget, a crew of over 250 people filming across Palermo, Siracusa, Tania, and Rome, with 5 dedicated tailors working purely on costumes, which frankly is well seen on the show if you look for it, because, and you don't even need to look that deep, but because a good chunk of this show's personality lives in the costume design. Alright, here is the honest verdict first. This cast is split, and it's not evenly. For me, the 2 key performances are Benedetta Porcaroli as Concetta and Francesco Colella as Don Calogero Sedara, the mayor. Porcaroli takes a character who could easily read as a passive victim and gives her a real restraint, real quiet heartbreak throughout the story. You can watch her deciding, not to react, which somehow lands harder than if she actually did react to something. Colella, on the other hand, has the tougher job here because he's playing new money ambition and vulgarity without turning into the guy that is basically a cartoon into the screen. He pulls it off. And it's good to see. Now, the more divisive casting sits right at the center of the love triangle. Deva Castle, yes, that one, Monica Bellucci's daughter. In her major TV debut, she is playing Angelica and stepping into a role Claudia Cardinale originated back into the 1963's movie. That's an intimidating pair of shoes to fill on your first real job. Sol Nani plays Tancredi, and a little bit of a gossip time here. The two actually started dating in real life after the filming, which the tabloids, you can imagine, had a field with it. On the screen though, the reality is that the chemistry reads more polite than combustible. And that is a real problem when the entire plot hinges on the love triangle blowing up a family. Kim Rossi Stewart plays Don Fabrizio. He is stepping into the shadows of Burt Lancaster, and he leans into a very different register entirely. He's less commanding physically. He is more tired. He has this internal weariness in him, which is, to be honest, its own kind of brave, honestly, because nobody wants to be the guy playing a smaller, quieter version of a role Lancaster once played strongly. And then there is the elephant in the room. Let's talk about it. Well, there was a big controversy, and it was about the accent issue, which I think actually matters more than it sounds like it should. Several of the leads don't use the authentic Sicilian accents, and it's shocking next to supporting cast members who do lean into the regional dialect. Small thing, sure, if you're not in Italy, but in a story this rooted in one of the specific corners of Italy, accent is identity. It is the difference between playing a Sicilian aristocracy and basically playing a costume of it. Visually, this is where this series actually shines. It earns its sumptuous reputation. Filming took place across real Sicilian locations: Palermo, Siracusa, Catania. It was giving the show a tactical, sun-bleached authenticity that CGI simply cannot fake it. The cinematography, led by Nicolas Bruel, leans into the painfully wider shots sweeping states' interiors, the sun-scorched landscapes, candlelit ballrooms, you name it. And it's very much in conversation with the visual language of Visconti's original film, right down to referencing its famous ballroom sequence. Honestly, this is where the show is at its most confident, is how it looks. Costume design, handled by Carlo Poggioli and Edoardo Russo, is genuinely one of the show's highlights here and the strongest elements. 5 tailors dedicated purely to period-accurate garments, and it shows in every single frame. The layered morning black of the aristocracy against the vivid new money color palette of the Sedara family. New money versus old money, you mean? At some point, you start reading the plot through basically the wardrobe alone. Black means old money, grieving quietly. Color means new money, making noise. Nobody in this show has to say a word about class. You couldn't already guess from basically the costume rack. Even the score leans classical echoing Verdi to deliberately mirroring the original film soundtracks. And I got back and forth with this one when I found it out. It plays as a loving homage, but is it really? It also occasionally plays like a show that it's a little too tethered into the predecessor to find its own musical voice. Both things can be true at once. A few key differences I found on my research worth flagging for anybody who has actually read the novel is here. So the book is written almost entirely through Don Fabrizio's internal perspective. It's a deeply interior novel filtered through his fatalism and irony. The series, on the other hand, by necessity, externalizes that inner voice into dialogue and visible drama, which shifts the tone from melancholic reflection towards a more conventional prestige drama plotting. That's not really a knock on the show. It is not. You cannot film somebody's internal monologue for 6 hours without having a voiceover. But it does mean the series trades Lampedusa's irony from something closer to basically melodrama. The novel also spans a much longer timeline. It follows Don Fabrizio across decades, all the way to the death years later, and even includes basically a set of decades after that focus on his aging daughters. The Netflix series compresses the story into a tighter, a more immediate 6-episode window, which is centered on the Risorgimento years. which means some of the novels, basically meditation on long-term declines, get traded for a more, contained, romance-forward arc. And I can also say from my finds that the series leans harder into Tancredi and Angelica Concetta love triangle than basically the book does. This shifted the story's center of gravity from political philosophy towards romantic one is what is the big difference here. And that is a deliberate, very Netflix choice here. Sell the heartbreak up front and trust that politics will ride underneath the love story. So, does the new Leopard live up to the 1963 film or the novel that it started at all? Honestly, not quite. I really don't think it was ever going to be honest, but visually it is a genuine event. And emotionally it still lands because the question it's asking is the following. It is about power, adaptation, and what we sacrifice to survive change haven't really gone anywhere. It's still there. And maybe that's the real proof of how right Lampedusa was when he wrote this novel. He wrote one line about a family clinging to power by pretending to change, and 70 years later, one Palme d'Or winning film and one Netflix remake later, we're still using it to describe ourselves. Even Netflix, a company built on entirely giving on audience exactly what they already want, apparently couldn't resist retelling a 300-page argument about how nothing really changes. And they're liking the whole book adaptation, by the way. It is kind of poetic, honest, this whole thing. Everything changes, so everything can stay the same. Even the way we keep retelling this story. If you read the book, tell me in the comments, what did you think? Is the adaptation valid? Do you actually like this between, book versus series, book versus film comparison? Do you believe that things can actually change? Tell me. Do not forget to hit the bell and to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. And for now, ciao, ciao.